Okay, let's join together in saying our blessing for immersing ourselves in Torah, Lasok b'divrei Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lasok b'divrei Torah lasok b'divrei Torah hafok ba lasok b'divrei Torah all right, let's jump into this week's Haftarah portion. So first of all, this week's Torah portion happens to be Yitro, and Yitro is the Torah portion where we receive the 10 Commandments. So there's a whole lot going on in our Torah portion. I brought in just a few short verses from the Torah portion as part of Haftarah, but there is quite enough going on in our Haftarah portion today. So here we go. Can everyone see this okay? Yes, good. Does anyone want to just read the first few verses?
I could do it.
Thank you, Irv. And Steve, I'll call you next time.
Okay. In the year that...
Whoops, sorry. There we go.
In the year that King Uzziah died, I beheld my Lord seated on a high and lofty throne, and the skirts of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs stood in attendance on him. Each of them had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face. With 2 he covered his legs, and with 2 he would fly. And one would call to the other, Holy, 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 the Lord of hosts. His presence fills all the earth. The doorposts would shake at the sound of one who called, and the house kept filled with smoke. I cried, Woe is me! I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among the people of unclean lips. Yet my own eyes have beheld the King, Lord of hosts. And then one of the seraphs flew over me with a live coal which he had taken from the altar, a pair of tongs.
Okay, so now do you see why I'm saying there's a lot going on within this text? So who is the seraph, or who are the seraphim?
Aren't they angels?
Yeah.
Okay, so perhaps they're a kind of angel, and there's lots of different celestial beings that exist within Judaism. What else do we learn about them from this text?
They have a lot of wings.
Yeah, they have a whole lot of wings. 6 wings seems like quite a lot. Like, where do they put all of them, right?
Maybe that indicates that they are a different kind of a messenger than an angel also, possibly with more able to decide what to do at the spur of the moment, whereas the angels are going up and down with a single mission.
They have more flexibility. Absolutely.
They reverence and they serve God.
Yeah, there's this really close relationship between them and God. Absolutely.
And they cooperate with one another. Holy, 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 the Lord of hosts.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing to have in mind here. And we're going to get back to that holy, 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 because that might sound very, very familiar to some of us, right?
Yes.
But one of the interesting things is generally God does not appear with celestial beings. Either God appears or celestial beings appear. But here we have both. that is very, very unique for a Jewish text. So why? Why are they there? What is their purpose?
Depends on what Isaiah was smoking when he wrote that.
We definitely have this, and in a couple of minutes, we're going to be looking at Ezekiel to compare it to this, and similar kind of thing, right? These are very elaborate visions that might not be in line with things that we have experienced.
I like that phrase.
Any other insights based on this text? Anything that stands out to you?
The first thing that came into my mind when I heard the unclean lips was I thought of Moses.
Yeah, it's a little bit different wording, but lips is certainly the similarity, right? The wording with Moses was he had uncircumcised lips, right? Which is kind of also really weird phrasing. Like, what does that even mean? And here it's unclean lips. And we're going to get into that wording and what it might be alluding to here. But perhaps there is an allusion to Moses as well. Yeah, Cornelia.
Yeah, something else is the issue of whether God can be seen or not, or what kind of visual presence God has. And it seems a little bit a different presence than you get in Exodus. I mean, there is the Lord, I guess that means God, not the king, seated on a high and lofty throne with robes that have skirts. So there's a little more detail of a visual. Right, but then he's all basically his appearance is mostly covered up by the seraph's wings. So anyway, but there's still that emphasis on that kind of question mark, or the focus on what aspects of God's physical appearance are present and which are not. And yet, and paradoxically, it also says his presence fills all the earth. So it's funny, he's not supposed to be seen entirely, and yet we're supposed to think that he's everywhere, or God is everywhere.
Yeah, these contradictory statements that exist all at the same time.
Yeah.
Was there someone else who was saying something also?
God is talking. God is not talking here. It is the seraphs. Is that what they're called? Yeah, seraphs who are talking. Like the days of God talking face to face with man are over.
Yeah, it certainly is not appearing here that way.
That there is a God is not over. But I'm interested in the unclean lips piece, actually.
Yeah, we're going to get to that in just a little bit. I thought I heard someone else's voice saying something a minute ago that was cut off. I just want to make sure. Okay, feel free to jump in if there is something that you want to say.
I just think unclean lips may also be a reference to speaking wrongly, evilly, or speaking.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
something else that has to do with speaking is that live coal. What didn't Moses become a stutterer because he picked up a coal? It was thought when he was a baby and thought it was beautiful, put it in his mouth.
Yes, that's one of the midrashim, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, do you think it's the coal, the sheriff of the coal went to Isaiah, our prophet here? This is a long time after
There is some
That's,
past the Torah.
yeah, that's absolutely true. But the way that all these texts work is they're always interlocking with one another. And we'll see lots of different allusions, like things from this Torah portion that we can see the way it overlaps, or the Haftarah portion, we can see the way that it overlaps with the Torah portion. And if a word appears somewhere within our text, very often whoever wrote it physically down had in mind all of the other times that the word was used elsewhere.
True.
And that's why studying Torah, concordance is very often our best friend. Does everyone know what a concordance is? Basically, it's like a fancy dictionary of sorts, except it doesn't just give the definition of words. It actually points out every time within the Tanakh that a word is used. So that if you type in, seraph with the Hebrew spelling of the word seraph or seraphim, it will list every single time that word appears throughout the entire Tanakh, and very often will actually put it in sections. Here it seems to allude to this. Here it adds this element, that kind of a thing, which is a very useful tool in trying to understand the deeper meanings in texts. And one of the really cool things is that concordance now has been added and is in the process of being added more still to Sepharia. So that if you were to look at this text sheet on your own, you can go on and click on a word and you can actually see a lot of that there. So you can have fun playing with it and just do that. I can't show it right now because I'm in editor mode, but if you were in an editor mode, you would. Okay. So let's go down a little bit more. We're going to look at Ezekiel, and there's two different texts I have here. These are similarly kind of out there texts and classifications of a celestial being. In the first case, we were looking at the seraphim. In this case, we're looking at celestial beings that are cherubs. So they are different from one another, but you'll see that they have some similarities. Would anyone like to read this text? Steve, thank you.
I looked, and lo, a stormy wind came sweeping out of the north. A huge cloud and flashing fire surrounded by a radiance, and in the center of it, in the center of the fire, a gleam of amber. In the center, they were also the figures of 4 creatures, and this was their appearance. They were the figures of human beings. However, each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. The legs of each were fused into a single rigid leg, and the feet of which they were like a single calf's hoof, and their sparkle was like the luster of burnished bronze. They had human hands below their wings. The 4 of them had their faces and their wings on their 4 sides. Each one's wings touched. Yeah, I lost it now.
Right here, verse 9.
Yeah, there it is. Each one's wings touched those of the other. They did not turn when they moved. Each could move in the direction of any of its faces. Each of them had a human face at the front. Each of the 4 had a face of a lion on the right. Each of the 4 had a face of an ox on the left, and each of the 4 had the face of an eagle at the back. Each their faces, as for their wings, they were separated. Above, each had 2 touching those of the others, while the other 2 covered his body. And each could move in the direction of any of its faces. They went wherever the Spirit impelled them to go, without turning when they moved. Such then was the appearance of the creatures. With them was something that looked like burning coals of fire. This fire, suggestive of torches, kept moving about among the creatures. The fire had a radiance, and lightning issued from the fire. Wow.
Quite an image, right?
There's supposed to be 2 of them that were supposed to be guarding the Ark of the Covenant, right?
Yes, yeah.
Protecting it with their
That
wings.
is absolutely true. That we're above that, but we're not up to that part of the Torah yet. We'll get there. You're absolutely right, though. There are 2 cherubs that are a part of the Bishkan. So we're going to read just a few more verses. It's not a whole lot more, just because you haven't had enough. I'll just read this really quickly. So above the heads of the creatures was a form, an expanse, with an awe-inspiring gleam as of crystal was spread out above their heads. Under the expanse, each had 1 pair of wings extended toward those of the others, and each had another pair covering its body. When they moved, I could hear the sound of their wings like the sound of mighty waters, like the sound of Shaddai, a tumult like the din of an army. Shaddai, by the way, is one of God's names, right? When they stood still, they would let their wings droop. From above the expanse over their heads came a sound. When they stood still, they would let their wings droop. Above the expanse over their heads was a semblance of a throne in appearance like a sapphire, and on top, upon the semblance of the throne, was the semblance of a human form. Okay, so now that you've had two really, really intricate images of celestial beings, what are the differences between the cherubim in Ezekiel's vision from that of the seraphim in Isaiah's? And what's similar?
I'm puzzled by the sound of El Shaddai. What does that mean even?
Right?
We don't. I don't think.
Yeah, the sound of Shaddai, right? That is, what does God sound like? Right?
What did he sound like to Ezekiel, more specifically?
And also the word Shaddai. I mean, what does Shaddai mean? It means breast. That's one of God's names, but that's what it means. Like, what does that sound as opposed to another name of God, you know? It's an interesting choice. Yeah, Cornelia.
If I trying to compare the divine beings here in the two passages, the seraphim seem much more domesticated, much kind of calmer, and the whole image of them caring for a king or attending on a king is also something we have in our own world. Whereas this is otherworldly, and I think that in other literature of other countries, but I can't give you the reference right now, this is a kind of a vision of an apocalypse, the way the end of the world looks, or the end of the universe. Part of the idea maybe of the multiplicity of being, it's kind of a lack of syntax. All the syntax is all crazy. And it maybe conveys something that's it's just otherworldly and maybe a slight overtone of disaster.
Yeah, I mean, what's really important, and I think we might have touched on this several weeks ago when we were looking at Ezekiel, although I don't think we were reading this particular passage, that these images in Ezekiel actually gave birth to a brand of mysticism called Merkava mysticism, right? The mysticism of the chariot, because this is the chariot vision. And it's a way of having this deep connection to God.
It's interesting.
And that's really interesting also that you say the seraphim seem a lot calmer than this. I want you to hold on to that, because when we get to a few texts in a minute, you might actually find something quite surprising going on with that word seraphim. Yeah, Steve, did you want to say something?
It's interesting how the concept of a cherub has changed so much into the English version, where we think of this Valentine type guy going around shooting bows and arrows with a big fat chubby face, which is not at all what can be described here.
Yeah, not in the least, right? When you look at this. Yeah, anyone else? Like, why are these, what is the purpose of the cherubim here?
So seraphim one or many?
Seraphim is plural. Seraph is singular.
Well, certainly would give you a vehicle for the presence of God.
Yeah.
It's like so mind-blowing. I think of somebody who is like a crazed artist, you know, doing as fast as they can with as much color and as much, you know, and then somebody who is also likes to write, you know, stories or something. It's just an incredible thing. It's like, where does this person dream this up from? Is this from how things were viewed at that time for Jewish people, or is this a whole epiphany of one person's?
Yeah, and we're going to go there. We'll talk a little bit about some of the influences in a moment. So a few just like little things to latch onto, right? Both of them are winged beings. Seraphim have 6 wings, cherubim have 4, right? The way in which they move is different. The seraphim have far more freedom than the cherubim. I mean, I think we pointed a little bit of that out. There are differences between them. There's no doubt about it. What's going on? Let me go down. Okay, we did that. Okay, but what I want to bring in now, and we're going to get to some of the other things that I know you've already asked some questions about. I want to look at the word seraph as it appears in the Torah, because when it appears in the Torah, it is not in an angelic form. It is a very different kind of being. Okay, this very same word, same Hebrew, very, very different meaning. So this is a text that takes place in Deuteronomy when the Israelites are acting in a way that God is not entirely pleased with, to say the least, right? It says, when you have eaten your fill, give thanks to, actually, no, that's the next text, never mind. This one is just kind of warning the people when they go into Israel to be appreciative to God, lest something bad happen. When you have eaten your fill, give thanks to your God for the good land given you. Take care lest you forget your God, Adonai, and fail to keep the divine commandments, rules, and laws which I enjoin upon you today. When you have given your fill and have built fine houses to live in, and your herds and flocks have multiplied, and your silver and gold have increased, and everything that you own has prospered, beware lest your heart grow haughty, and you forget your God, Adonai, who freed you from the land of bondage, from Egypt, the house of bondage, who led you through the great and terrible wilderness with its seraph serpents and scorpions, a parched land with no water in it, who brought forth water for you from the flinty rock. And it goes on and says, not so great things will happen if you don't follow, right? This is Moses' warning to the people. But this is one of the only times in the Torah where this word appears, and seraph is referring specifically to serpents. So we might ask, what do serpents have to do with seraphim, right? Let's look at one more text before we start to answer that question. And that's why your comment, Cornelia, about them being, protective and calm, it doesn't have that feeling when we look at the word seraph here, right?
Right.
So this is from Numbers 21. So the people spoke against God and against Moses. Why did you make us leave Egypt to die in the wilderness? There's no bread, there's no water. We have come to load this miserable food. God sent seraph serpents against the people. This, by the way, is right after Miriam died. So that's why there's no water. The people came to Moses and said, we sinned by speaking against God and against you. Intercede with God and take away the serpents from us. And Moses interceded for the people. Then Adonai said to Moses, make a seraph figure and mount it on a standard. And anyone who is bitten then looks at it shall recover. Moses made a copper serpent and mounted it on a standard. And when bitten by a serpent, anyone who looked at the copper serpent would recover. So what's going on here? What is the seraph?
I'm wondering if that didn't come from Egypt, the concept.
Yeah, it's a good instinct. We're going to look at that in just a second. Yeah.
Right.
No, that's great. Cornelia, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention, I think sometimes dragons are called serpents.
Yes.
Yeah, so just to complicate things.
Well, exactly.
I've seen some like apocalyptic visions with these huge dragons that are all wrapped around a castle with all these wings and, tails with spikes on them and things like that. And they've got this they're mostly tails. So they do have this rather snake-like look, but not entirely, but a lot. They have wings, unlike snakes.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think they are called serpents.
Mm-hmm. And I've seen the word seraph actually translated as dragon. I've seen that sometimes, and I think it's for that exact same kind of idea. Any other comments or thoughts here about this?
Well, I think anytime we're talking about celestial beings, there's many different things that come into our imagination as what they look like.
Yeah.
I could easily see this as being a dragon-like figure. I could also see in the Ezekiel one, it felt a little more human because of the human hand that they talked about in the Ezekiel form.
Yeah.
But in this form, I could see it like I can imagine if I gave this as an assignment to my students in class, there'd be like 15 students and there'd be 15 different drawings of many different things. They wouldn't all look anywhere near the same.
Yeah, that's exactly true.
But the people of this time, 3,500 years ago or so, had far fewer visual experiences than we have today, obviously. And that's why I think it comes back to the snakes of Egypt. They're traveling in the desert. This is the thing that they fear for good reason. There are a lot of poisonous snakes in Egypt and in the Sinai.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So why don't we look at this? So Dr. Richard Letterman actually wrote a lot about this and about some of the influences from other cultures and things that were going on at the time. And this was his understanding. It's a little bit long, but I think it's worth it. He said Isaiah was likely influenced by the winged Urias serpent, which was a popular image in royal Egyptian iconography. So going back to Egypt, certainly they would have been also inspired by some of the creatures they met along their long and arduous journey. Of course they would. The Urias serpent is associated with the Egyptian goddess Wadjet. I don't actually know if that's how to pronounce it or not, so I apologize if I'm pronouncing it wrong. Originally the patron and protector deity of the lower, meaning northern Egypt, and eventually one of the two patron deities of the pharaoh. The image of the winged snake was meant both a threatening and a protective image, protective of Pharaoh and threatening to his enemies. As Wadjet says about herself in spell 17 of the Book of the Dead, every god is afraid because so great and mighty is my protection of the god from him who would vilify him. Melishit glitters for me. I live according to my will, for I am Wadjet, lady of devouring flame, and few approach me. Pharaohs wore the Urias serpent on their crowns and were often depicted standing beneath winged serpents, whose wings were outspread in a gesture of protection. The Judean king Hezekiah used the winged Urias imagery in his seals in the period before he surrendered to the Assyrian king Sennacherib, after which he expunged the Egyptian iconic winged serpent from Judea elite's repertoire. Since Isaiah was a contemporary of Hezekiah and active in the king's court, it would be logical to surmise that the seraphim of Isaiah's vision were similarly understood as winged serpents accompanying the divine king of Elohim, who, after all, is described in this vision in royal terms as seated on a high and lofty throne.
Oh,
So it's kind of interesting how all of these cultural pieces weave themselves into these texts. It's important to hold on to that in our background as we start to go through our text, because so far we've really only looked at the first few verses just to understand what these seraphim are. And there's a lot more in this text that we have yet to get to. So we have these seraphim that are doing their thing with all their wings. We have God on a throne. And then these words from Isaiah 6:3 are straight, exact copies as one of the prayers that we offer in the morning. So it says, V'kara ze el ze v'amar. Basically, all the seraphim are looking one to the other, and they're calling out, Kadosh, 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 holy, 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 Adonai Tzivaot, the Lord of hosts, Kol haaretz kivodo. God's presence fills, or God's honor fills this world. Okay, so why, trying to figure out exactly the right question to ask here. We go from this image of the seraphim straight into this proclamation of God's holiness. All right. Why do you think this text right here is brought into our daily, weekly worship? And we could look at the text right here. We can actually read through it right now so that we can have our reminder. Like, Nekadesh et Shimcha Ba'olam. Nekadesh et Shimcha Ba'olam, right? Kishem Shemakdishim Hoto Bishmei Marom. That might be familiar. We shall sanctify your name in the world in the same way as they sanctify it in the heavens above, as is written by the hand of your prophets. Isaiah 6:3, quoting that verse above. And they called this one to that one, meaning the seraphim calling one to the other, saying, Kadosh, 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 holy, holy, holy is the eternal of hosts. The whole world is full of God's glory. So Lord of hosts is a name of God that does not appear within the 5 books of Moses at all, but occurs something like 260 times throughout the rest of the Tanakh. And it often is a name referring to a god of war. That often is the context. It has something to do with battle and fighting against enemies. So holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole world is full of God's glory. And it's a call and response prayer. Blessed is the glory of God from God's place. And this is also a quote a little bit from Ezekiel, not the part that we read, but a part shortly thereafter. And then the leader says, and in your holy words, it is written saying, may the eternal reign forever. Your God, O Zion, for each and every generation, praise God. So we're going to stop there. Why is it that this piece of Isaiah appears in our prayer or appears in our daily worship? What is it that you think that everyone who was putting together our tefillah was trying to get us to connect with, and including this as part of our worship?
A profound statement of what's the word? The magnificence of God. I'm at a loss for words.
The power of God.
Part of the Kedusha that we say every day.
Yeah, the power of God, right? These images, they might strike us as, like really out of the norm. They get our attention, but there's a kind of awe that's attached to all of that.
The fact it's repeated 3 times, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. And
Yeah.
each time we physically raise ourselves up as a symbolic metaphor, I guess. You're raising your own holiness. You shall be holy, for I am holy.
Yeah, and the tradition is also, by the way, to have our feet together as we're offering these words. Why? Well, if we go back to Ezekiel's vision, we remember there's 1 foot. They're standing on 1 foot. And so we too have our feet together so that we can stand upright as if we too have 1 foot, as if we are like the angels. Yeah, Cornelia.
Yeah, I was just wondering, who is speaking here? We shall sanctify your name in the world.
This is, in this case, this is a communal prayer. So this is not a text. This is part of the Amidah, part of our prayer service. I brought it in simply because it is quoting this exact verse from Isaiah.
Oh, right. And in Isaiah, who is speaking? One would call to the other. Is it one of those fantastical beings, or Isaiah just has seraphim in it?
Yeah, exactly. So Isaiah is the one who's speaking, but he's saying that the seraphim are calling one to the other.
The reason I'm asking that question is that I keep, you keep thinking or seeing in the account in Exodus how much God is always reminding human beings of God's existence. and looking for comments about maybe how great God is, how great, and looking to be praised by all around. Everyone has to appreciate God's greatness. Well, it seems like extra special if you have these transcendental beings saying the same thing. That's what I want to say.
Yeah, absolutely. It's connecting us to a kind of holiness that we might not experience in our everyday.
It's interesting that each of these beings, these different things, that the seraphs and all of those, I'm looking at the one with the seraph, where you have, first of all, the seraph can bite and kill, but if you make this, you make a copper servant, and if you look at that, then you live. That the same type of what the being or the thing would look like both can kill and cure. And that God, when God gets really annoyed, does both kill and cure. So maybe if you think of people are, you know how we get lazy and we say, yeah, I don't want to do that anymore. I've seen that a dozen times. And God puts out something tremendously different, but with the same message and the same messages. The only one where it's a call and response and you sing it in the morning is really beautiful.
It is beautiful. And Rabbi Catherine, what you're picking up on there in terms of the seraphim and how it cures, but it also hurts, that is going to be reflective of where this text in Isaiah goes. So even though it's not from the Isaiah text, just thinking about that parallel text of the seraph, I think is in mind when we look at this one. So thank you for pointing that out. I'm looking at the time. I'm going to bring us a little further down so that we can get to the meat of Isaiah here. So the next verse says, the doorpost would shake at the sound of the one who called, and the house kept filling with smoke. This is referring to calling God, right? And when it says the house kept filling with smoke, now the smoke there might be an allusion to one of two things. One could be the cloud, which is supposed to be God's presence as the Israelites are going through the wilderness. I didn't bring that text in. The other is from this week's Torah portion in Yitro, where it says, now Mount Sinai was all in smoke, for God had come down upon it in fire. The smoke rose like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled violently. And then, of course, the people received the 10 Commandments. There is this allusion to this mystical smoke and a connection to God that is being referred to here. But then we get a little bit further, and this is where I think the Isaiah text really has some meat to it. So I cried, woe is me, I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips. That's getting to that unclean lips part we had questions about before. And I live among the people of unclean lips, meaning I am impure and the people around me are also impure. Yet my own eyes have beheld the King, Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphs flew over to me with a live coal, which he had taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. He touched it to my lips and declared, now that this has touched your lips, your guilt shall depart and your sin be purged away. So somehow this live coal has taken the sin away. There's definitely this connection between unclean and sin that we have going on here.
Well, notably, the Isaiah does not go away. I mean, if you saw something coming over with a live coal to put on your lip, most people would get the heck out of there. This is thrust on a huge plane.
Yeah, that's definitely true. In this article by Dr. Richard Letterman, and by the way, this text, if you look it up, it is a linked thing, so you can go to the whole article. It has a lot of really great stuff in there, but he talks about Avigdor Victor Hurwitz, professor at Ben Gurion University, who compares the purification of Isaiah's lips by the seraphim with mouth purification ceremonies in Mesopotamian literature, particularly the mouth cleansing ceremony. The ceremony is attested in regard to several cultic circumstances. According to Hurwitz, the pure mouth enables the person or object to stand before the gods or to enter the divine realm. Having been cleansed by the coals of the seraphim, Isaiah hears that God is looking for someone to carry his message to the people, and Isaiah volunteers for the position, as we will soon see. So that's one way of understanding this. It's not the only way of understanding this, but it is an interesting kind of cultural piece that easily could have been brought in. Okay, looking at the time, I'm going to skip over this beautiful text so that we can go to Isaiah 6 to 10. Does anyone want to read this?
I will.
Thank you, Misty.
Then I heard the voice of my Lord saying, "Whom shall I send? Who will go for us?" And I said, "Here am I, send me." And he said, "Go, say to that people, hear indeed, but do not understand. See indeed, but do not grasp. Dull that people's mind, stop its ears, and seal its eyes, lest seeing with its eyes and hearing with its ears, it also grasp with its mind, and repent and save yourself, and save itself."
Okay, so what's going on in this text? What did Isaiah volunteer for?
Well, he's volunteering to be a messenger for God, right?
Nanny.
Yeah.
Same as Abraham said.
Yeah.
And he's going to come up against a lot of resistance, just like Moses did and other prophets, right? And so be prepared that these people aren't going to hear you. They're not going to see you. They're not going to listen. They're probably going to persecute you. So coal on your lips is probably the minor things compared to what he's going to go through.
But
Right.
then you have an accepting to do God's work. Then it is Isaiah who will stop the ears and seal the eyes and grasp the mind and repent and say, I mean, that's amazing. What a job.
Yeah, he volunteers to be this messenger of God, to give the message. But generally, when a prophet volunteers to give a message, or most of the time they don't even volunteer, they're just voluntold, right? It's with the hope that the people will hear them and repent. But here there's something different going on. God is saying, no matter what you do, no matter what you say, even though I am calling you to go on this mission, I'm telling you right now, they will not be able to repent. In fact, I won't even allow them to repent. I'm sending you on a futile mission. So we could easily ask, like, why would God want Isaiah to go on this mission if it is God's intention that he be unsuccessful?
Well, I would assume at some point the mission ends and some people are left alive.
And they have hindsight, like, oh, gee.
That was a bad idea, that thing I just did, you know.
Maybe also to test Isaiah.
So what would that test be, Sharon?
I'm working on that.
Anyone else have an idea? Because that's a really interesting concept there.
Well, Isaiah doesn't back down and say, what? They didn't listen to you and now they're going to listen to me and you're telling me they aren't?
But it also reminds me of the binding of Isaac, where, you know, he goes up to a certain point and then then God intercedes. And maybe he's got to go to a certain point and be tested, and then God intercedes and says, no, this is what's going to happen. Or one of the cherubim or the comes and does something. I'm really reaching, I know.
No, I think this entire text is a reach. So reaching is entirely allowed.
What about,
Like he's testing Isaiah to see if he's going to get the leadership position or the messenger of God on earth position. Very great.
Yeah, maybe Cornelia, go ahead.
that's interesting, the leadership position, because I was also thinking about how the Israelites kept saying, or Moses kept appealing as this spokesperson for God, I guess, to Pharaoh, saying, we'll get rid of this particular plague if you'll let us go. And then the Pharaoh kept going back on his word, and it was God who was making it, the whole mission, Moses's mission, unsuccessful. And it seems like this. So I think that's a strong parallel.
I completely agree, right? So what's the purpose of that?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I mean, I think we all wrestle with that, right? I heard one teacher compare this with perhaps having a child who got into an accident. Why? Because he had been driving under the influence and gets a call from the son saying, pick me up, bail me out of jail. And has a talk with the son and says, well, this was totally unacceptable. You will never do this again, right? And the son's like, yeah, I will never do this again. This was awful. The next year, they get the same call. There was a DUI. He was driving under the influence. Only this time it's even worse. This time he actually hit someone. And so perhaps the parent says, you know what, actually, I'm going to let him stay in jail for the night. I'm going to let him face some of these consequences. He needs to know how serious this is. And so maybe this is they're not going to get a get out of jail free card here. There's going to be consequences for the people, but they still need to hear what it is that they're doing wrong.
Yeah, and the kids of these people who are just not listening to what God wants to happen, or listening to Isaiah, with whatever the consequences are, I would assume death. But that doesn't mean that the children who were witnessing this won't say, whoa, now I do not want to end up in that position. That there still is learning, but it flips in a different way, and there's one generation is learning from their ancestors or predecessors.
Yeah, what's important to remember about Isaiah, right, is he is a prophet around the time that the Assyrians are really taking over the area. So he is prophesying here on the brink of what will be a disaster for the Jewish people. He knows what it is that's coming, and he's correct, right? So this message here is saying, yeah, there's going to be consequences. There's going to be some really bad things ahead. It's important that you know what happens that led to this, but it's not just going to all go away. But if we go a little bit further in our text, maybe I'll get back to that in a second. This is the last piece where it says, I asked, how long, my Lord? And he replied, till towns lie waste without inhabitants and houses without people. And the ground lies waste and desolate, for the Eternal will banish the population, and deserted sites are many in the midst of the land. But while a 10th part yet remains in it, it shall repent. It shall be ravaged like the terebinth and the oak, which stumps are left even when they are felled. Its stump shall be a holy seed. So there's a few different commentaries based on this, right? What does it mean like the terebinth and like the oak? And Rashi comments on this saying, like the terebinth and like the oak, which at the time of their casting, when they cast off their leaves during the fall, one casting after another casting until nothing is left in it except the trunk, they too, the holy seed found in its midst, adhering to their holiness, they will be to me, as the trunk. Another explanation of mitzavta is its planting. Therefore, I will not destroy them, for I planted them as holy seed. Some explain that there was a gate in Jerusalem. Okay, so it's basically just saying like, even though there is so much destruction, know that there is this holy seed that will give birth in the future. The people will not be wiped out. There will be this holy remnant. And even Ezra goes on to say, holy seed will be the substance thereof. Holy seed will they be that remain after that. Those who would come back from the Babylonian exile are hinted at. So there's going to be this huge exile. There's going to be so much suffering, but there will be a remnant. There will be a path forward in the future. So if Isaiah had known all of this when God was calling for a volunteer, do you think Isaiah would have so enthusiastically volunteered?
He knew what was going to happen.
And that his words wouldn't be heard, but that there would be a remnant in the future.
It's like, if he may perceive himself as protecting the remnant, making sure there is a remnant, that there is an opportunity to change. People don't change, but there was an opportunity and there was a consequence. So, I mean, maybe he sees himself, a prophet, as a teacher at a very, very, very high price that he pays personally.
Yeah, Marla, go ahead.
I'm thinking that there's some wisdom here, that indeed, when one asks for a volunteer, the person who's doing the asking, or in this case, God, there is intention. And sometimes the volunteer is not going to understand that intention. So there's a fundamental responsibility that the giver of this assignment has in mind. And the focus in this case, I'm trying to make sense of everyone being quiet and not talking, whatever. And for me, it means that's the barrenness. That's what has to happen. So people don't focus on, you've heard this before, right? Don't focus on the messenger, focus on the message. And in this case, the message was going to come down the road a bit, right? And so I'm thinking that's what the motivation was. Whether or not Isaiah would come forward or not, he might have just been a person who's, people impulsively put their hand up and say, I volunteer. Some people also do it because they want a sense of appreciation or acknowledgement or whatever. I don't know the answer to this, whether or not, if he knew all this, would he have done it or not? I think there was a higher power that was controlling the situation.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that this remnant piece was really the symbol of hope for the future, because the truth is, this is at a time where the people are dealing with so much. And there have been many times in Jewish history where that has been the case, where it seems overwhelming how much pain and suffering there is, that there is no way out, right? But this text said, even when things become really hard, know that that remnant will remain, that there is the seed that will grow. And if we can put ourselves in protecting that remnant, then there is so much good in the future that will come to be. Which is exactly, I think, the message that the people needed to hear right at this time. We didn't get to this text, but I want to point it out in case anyone would like to look at it later. Where did it go? Oh, right here. In the book of Kings, there actually is a parallel text to this one in which Micaiah actually is calling out for a volunteer, and someone volunteers for a mission that perhaps is not entirely what they had thought they would have been volunteering for. So there are kind of parallel tracks within our tradition, and maybe another time we'll be able to look at this text. So let's stop right here. Any questions or comments as we sum up this text where we talked about different types of celestial beings and images that might have surprised us? The call for a volunteer for something that is a rather challenging task, and the remnant that is left. I know it's a lot to digest, all of this. But I'm so grateful to have been able to study with you today. And I hope that if we have a takeaway, perhaps it's that our understanding of God, our understanding of holiness might come in different forms, might sometimes come in ways that are unexpected, but and also might sometimes be disappointing. It might sometimes be really, really challenging and hard, but that we continue to work forward throughout all of the challenges thrown at us, because that small remnant can mean so much. So thank you so much for being here. And next week we'll continue our Torah study with our next portion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Rabbi, I have the letters now.
You have what?
The letters of the name.